Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Dean Karnazes has been named by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world and has pushed his body and mind to inconceivable limits. Among his many accomplishments, he has run 50 marathons in all 50 US states in 50 consecutive days. Wow. He's run across Death Valley in the middle of summer, and he's run a marathon to the South Pole. On 10 separate occasions, he's run a 200-mile relay race solo, racing alongside teams of 12. That's incredible. His list of competitive achievements include winning the world's toughest foot race, the Badwater Ultramarathon, and winning the Four Deserts Challenge. A New York Times bestselling author, Dean is a frequent speaker and panelist at many running and sporting events worldwide. An ESPN ESPY winner and three-time recipient of Competitor Magazine's Endurance Athlete of the Year award, Dean has served as an U.S. athlete ambassador in overseas sports diplomacy envoys to Central Asia and South America. He's twice carried the Olympic torch and is a recipient of the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition Lifetime Achievement Award. He has also raced and competed on all 7 continents twice. Unbelievable. That's a crazy introduction. Dean Karnazes, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Yeah, that was quite an introduction. I don't know if I can live up to that introduction. Maybe we should just end the interview right now. That's it, people. We're done.
I already had to abbreviate it, and I had to leave out an entire half page of the abbreviated version. This has all the list of all the amazing places you've appeared. So, yeah, you've accomplished a lot, and really looking forward to having this chat with you today.
Yeah, being on your show tops them all. So, yeah.
we know. Speaking of, you and I have a lot in common. If you don't mind, I just have a really brief story I'd like to share of my race achievements. I try to be modest on my own show, but I've never really told this story of a victory that I took. It was unofficial, but it was a big race win. In 2006, I was staying overnight in Denver, and it was very early in the morning. I hear a band start playing outside my hotel, and I look outside and I see that they're setting up the Race for the Cure, the Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure outside the hotel room. And my mom had just passed away about 4 months earlier from breast cancer, and she was an honorary chair of the race here in Salt Lake City. So I noticed that. I'm like, you know what? I don't have a bib, but let me just grab my shoes. I laced up and I hit the road and just jumped into the course right by the start line. And it was quite emotional. I'm crying most of the time, trying to fight back tears. And I just have this passing brief thought where I think like, wow, there's a lot of women on the course for this event. As I get all the way done, I finish. I go through the expo, and as I'm making my way back to my hotel, I can't get there because they're lining up a race. And I'm like, what is going on? My hotel's right there. We just ran this race. Why are there thousands of people staging? And over the intercom, they say, congratulations to everybody who participated in the women's only event earlier this morning. So I was a first place finisher out of one male runner in the women's only 2006 Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure.
Did you get arrested is the big question.
I should have. Yeah, I definitely should have. Hopefully that might be the topic of your next book. But yeah, not one of my finer moments for sure. Oh man. Well, we casually mentioned all of the amazing achievements that you've done in your career, and we just kind of brushed past the best-selling author part. And I think it's amazing all the things that you've been able to do, but also it's really understated how good of an author you are. I came across your work in 2021, I believe. You appeared on a podcast I was listening to at the time called The Daily Stoic. And I learned about your work, and you talked about this race in Sparta and how the marathon is not necessarily, the story that most people think they know. And I immediately got your book, and I've got so much respect for people that make me care about things that I previously didn't know or care about. So your writing is very transformative and really, you're very descriptive. And I would argue that runners, non-runners, anybody could be very much sucked into your writing style. You do a tremendous job.
That's a big compliment. I mean, writing and ultramarathoning, I think, are somewhat similar. It's 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. So to me, the act of writing is it's grunt work. It's like, it's like the blocking and tackling of everyday life is, to write a book.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. The finish line is ever changing, but I pride myself on being a good writer. I'm 100% Greek, as you know from the book. And, some of the greatest writing ever, starting with Homer, came out of Greece. So, my mom used to tell me the best writers are the best readers. So I read a whole lot, and hopefully a little bit of that will rub off on my writing.
Oh, it definitely does. I mean, when you talk about like eating a fig, I can taste the fig along with you. Or when you're, sweaty after a race, people can relate to that. It really kind of sucks you in, and it's easy to get it drawn in and kind of imagine the sights and sounds and even the taste and the feel of the wind as you write. So I realize that that you do have a gift, but you also work very, very hard at your craft to deliver a story that really drives people in. So I really appreciate that. So thank you so much for doing that work.
Yeah, I mean, you actually uncovered a secret of mine, and that is in my writing, I try to engage the five senses. And you just described what it feels like to read my writing, because I describe what it smells like, I describe what it tastes like, I describe what the skin, the air feels like on my skin. All of these things, I engage in my writing, and that's really a Homeric trick. I mean, that's why Homer is so powerful, because you feel like you're in these grisly scenes, and you're sweating, and and you feel the sense of fight or flight. So I think engaging the senses when you write is key to being a good writer. And anyone who aspires to be a good writer listening to this, try that. Just try during a scene describing what it looked like, what it smelled like, all of those things that I just discussed.
Yeah, that's a really great tip for anybody out there who's trying to get better at writing. I absolutely love that. We could talk about many, many runs that you've done and many incredible feats. I wanted to focus mostly on the book that you wrote called The Race to Sparta, and the things that you learned in a special run that you did, and also tying that in with a very special run in history that people think they know about, but might not know all the details about. But before we get into that, there was a real turning point in your life that seemed to come around age 30 for you on your birthday. Can you tell us about what happened on your 30th birthday?
Yeah, I blame my running career on bad tequila. So, I had gone through college, I graduated college, I went to graduate school, I went to business school and got an MBA. I had a very comfortable corporate job in San Francisco. And on the night of my 30th birthday, at midnight, I told my buddies that instead of, having another round of tequila to celebrate, I was going to run 30 miles to celebrate instead. And they looked at me and they said, "But you're not even a runner, you're drunk." And I said, I am drunk, but I'm still going to do it. And I walked out of this bar. I didn't own running gear at the time, but I had on these comfortable, silk boxer shorts, these silk underwear. I'll never forget. I took off my pants and just kind of flung them down the alleyway and just started shuffling into the night, heading south, knowing that a town called Half Moon Bay was 30 miles away. And somehow, after the alcohol, wore off, I still persisted, and I made it 30 miles. It wasn't pretty, there's a lot of chafing where the sun don't shine, but I persisted, and I got through it. And I thought, I love to be a runner. Uh, it's not sophisticated, practice. It doesn't require a lot of degrees like you have, but it's who you are. You love to run. So quit your corporate job and become a runner. And that was over 3 decades ago, and I'm still running.
That's amazing. Wow, I love that story. It's so great. Tell us about how your interest in, Greece in particular, obviously with your background being 100% Greek, but your interest in the marathon itself, how that kind of evolved and how that kind of turned into this story that you wanted to tell.
Yeah, the marathon is a global phenomena, as you know, and the marathon, the name itself conjures up all kinds of different images with people. I mean, it's become somewhat ubiquitous to use the word marathon with anything that's grueling. There's a marathon line at the post office. There's a marathon session of Congress. But Marathon is actually a place in Greece, not far from where I'm at right now in Athens. And there was a battle there that took place in 490 BC. And the legend has it that, after the Athenians somehow beat the Persians, although they were badly outnumbered, they somehow won. They sent this messenger to run to Athens to pronounce, Niki, Niki, or victory, victory. Niki in Greek means victory. We are victorious, and then he died. So that's the story of the marathon as we know it, if you know it. That's the story of where Phil Knight got this name of his new founded athletic footwear company, Nike. And I thought this is a fascinating story. There's no other sport. I mean, if you play hoops, or if you play soccer or football, Yeah, or golf. They have backstories, but nothing that dates back to ancient times, let alone a warrior who ran and died after delivering his message. Kind of the hero in us just longs for tales like this. So I got fascinated by it, and I started delving into the history books to kind of learn what really happened. And like many Greek tales, there's more to the story than meets the eye.
Yeah, there certainly is. Can you tell us about Phidippides? What kind of role he played in that culture, and then what kind of intertwine these two stories together, as you do so well in your book, telling the story of ancient Greece and also telling your story of how you wanted to recapture an even greater run that he accomplished.
Yeah, Phidippides was part of a class of citizens called hemodromi, which basically means day-long runner or all-day runner. And these were basically foot heralds, and they were like the equivalent of a faster satellite service nowadays. These guys could outrun horses, and the Greeks realized that in the mountainous and warm terrain of southern Greece, a trained runner could outrun a horse. It's been proven, in modern times that this is true, but these runners could run for 8, 9, 10 longer hours, 36 hours at a time without stopping. And that was the way that the Greeks could gather intelligence from neighboring city-states, disseminate information. So they had these hemodromi in all of the city-states that were basically trained as heralds. In 490 BC, as I said, the Persians invaded Greece along the western shoreline of a peninsula called Attica, where Athens is located. And their idea was, we're going to invade Greece. We're going to overthrow this idea of democracy, which is ruled by the people, which is crazy. Like, a king needs to rule the people, not the people themselves. And uh, when the Athenians saw the numbers, which were about 100 to 200,000 Persians versus about 10,000 fighting Athenians, they realized they were going to get their asses kicked. So if you've seen the movie 300, who's the most badass fighting force in ancient Greece? The Spartans. So the idea was for the Athenians to recruit the Spartans into battle to help them fight off the Persians. There was just one small, caveat to that. The distance between Athens and Sparta is about 140 to 150 miles, depending on the route you take. And they had to send this foot messenger, Pheidippides, to run there. The history records show him arriving the day after setting out, which can roughly be interpreted as minus 36 hours, sub 36 hours. So somehow in 490 BC, this is before there's any sort of GPS navigation. This is before there's any sort of headlight, like to run on a trail. This is before Nike invented, their Vaporfly 4% or whatever, their shoe that can, defy gravity. This guy was sent to run from Athens to Sparta, and he somehow pulled it off. So
Wow.
that's the basis of the story. Yeah.
That's incredible. How many rest stops were there along the way where he could fill up on a quick drink of water and grab an energy bar?
Yeah, that's a good teaser. I mean, there were none, obviously. There weren't cheering fans along the way. I mean, he had to forage for food. He probably carried like a bladder, a goat bladder where he could keep water in there. But other than that, he probably had this paste called pastilli, which is ground up sesame seeds and honey. That was what the ancient athletes used to use for fuel. But beyond that, obviously there's no power bar. There's no goo energy gel. There's nothing like that. So how he did this and how he did it in such a remarkable time, even by modern standards, it's remarkable. It was fascinating to me. So I thought
So
I gotta try this. I gotta try what he did.
it's
And in
incredible.
Greece, in modern Greece, there's a race called the Spartathlon that follows the same route, somewhat the same route. I mean, it's paved over earth, a lot of it now, versus wild trails like in 490 BC. But I thought, okay, you're going to be on asphalt, which is a little bit different than what Phidippides did. But at least try doing this race, this Spartathlon, using the foods that he used. So only have figs, only have olives, only have cured meat, only have Pastilli, and only drink water. Don't drink any sort of sports, nutrition beverage or any sort of electrolyte replenishment fluid. Just try to run as he did in this modern time.
Wow. That's amazing. I can't wait to talk about this race. Let's park the Pheidippides part of the story for a minute and talk about you. Tell us about your preparation for the Spartathlon. Obviously, you said you wanted to try to do it with the natural foods that they would have had at his time, but how else were you preparing for this event? You weren't, in Greece at the time, and like you mentioned, the terrain is incredibly challenging from the way you describe it. How were you able to prepare for this incredibly long and challenging event?
Yeah, and hot event as well. It's very hot in southern Greece when they hold the event in September. So, I was living in Southern California at the time, and I would go running up in the hills and mountains as high as I could find, in a puffy North Face ski parka to, emulate some of that heat I would encounter. I also trained, for up to 12 hours of running using only figs for fuel. So I was experimenting with these ancient fuels, getting used to assimilating them in my modern body.
Wow. That's tremendous that you were able to do that. Tell us about the race itself. This is an incredibly limited race. I mean, most marathons, as people know, you can, sign up, you can access them. This one seems much, much more difficult to get into.
Yeah, I mean, there's really strict qualifying standards to get accepted, and there's also a lottery. Even if you can meet these standards, you still have to get into a lottery. And the race is 153 miles, and the cutoff is 36 hours. So it's a tough race. It's very hilly. It's very warm, and you don't have a lot of time. The other thing is that you have to be in ancient Corinth, which is about a little over 50 miles within 9.5 hours. And this is just following the ancient record of Herodotus, talking about Pheidippides when he did this in 490 BC, kind of the milestones he hit along the way. So essentially, what that means is you've got to push pretty hard for the first 50 miles just to make that cutoff to keep going. And then once you get to 50 miles, you're fried, you're exhausted, and you have another 103 miles to go. So this Spartathlon race it's legendary for how tough it is.
That's crazy. You also describe all the logistical challenge that you had to face as well. I think when most people think of an event now, they think, they're blocking off traffic at least for several hours. The streets are lined. You've got plenty of space. You've got all the spectators. This was quite a different event as far as the logistics go, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you enjoyed my book, I can tell.
Oh, so
So I
much, man.
mean, yeah, I mean, I kind of pulled the modern with the ancient with the modern. I mean, now in modern day Greece, I'm sorry to say because I'm Greek, it's almost like a third world country in some areas. I mean, the roads are horrible. The drivers, they don't stop, they don't yield. So you're dealing with traffic as well. To the credit of the Spartathlon, the race though, they have changed the day from Friday to Saturday the past 2 years, and that's made it a lot better because they were holding the race. It was starting on Friday morning, and you're in the middle of Athens commute, and Athens is a big city. I mean, it's 5 million people in Athens, and like any commute city, the traffic is horrible. So just getting out of Athens during the modern Spartathlon was as much of a challenge as anything else.
Wow. And we also know that with ultra marathons, you do need a support team. But again, logistics came into play here. It's not like you could just call on your team at any time. There are only certain points along the way that they could be there and only a limited amount of things that they could support you with.
Yeah, I mean the race tries to be true to kind of the original endeavor. You can have a support crew, and they can provide certain, change of clothing, some types of food, that kind of thing, at certain points, at restricted points. In moral support as well, because you're pretty much at a mental low a lot of this race, think you're never going to make it. But it's somewhat limited. It's not like some of the other ultra marathons I've run where your crew can be right alongside you if it's in a car, or they can be at frequent aid stations along a trail race. This one, you're kind of on your own.
Yeah. And I've heard from ultra marathoners as well that you want to have a wide assortment of foods available. You don't necessarily know what you're going to want when push comes to shove. You might want something really sugary. You might want, like, you famously ate a whole pizza, I believe, one time. Like, you never really know what you want with such limited choices for food. Was that a challenge for you?
Well, I mean, it became a challenge, and I trained on these foods, and I was kind of going into it with the mindset, okay, this is not going to be, a gastronomy festival. You're going to be pretty limited in what you can eat. But the problem was eating figs for, over 24 hours. I trained, I told you I trained with figs for 10, 12-hour training runs. But when you get into, you know, the 20s, the 30s, the figs start to work their magic. I mean, why do we eat figs? If we're stopped up and we want to be more regular, we eat figs. But when you're running a 153-mile ultra marathon, you don't want to be regular. Like you kind of want to stop that activity. But the figs had the reverse consequences. I'll leave it at that, Casey. I
Wow.
don't. I'm not gonna
Even
engage the five senses on that one. Yeah.
we appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I've done enough like long distance bike rides to know that the palate fatigue is so real. Like if you're having something maybe a little bit sweeter or whatever, any kind of fruit, like it's good for a while, and then you just don't want it anymore. You want something different to mix up. So I appreciate that. That must have been a real challenge as you were going to only have a few things to choose from. But I also wanted to ask you about some of the other competitors that were doing the event. It seemed like everything was really spread out and a real battle of attrition on any ultra marathon, but this one in particular.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of color that happens along the course on this race, and that's part of it being in Greece. Part of it being that half the field is from overseas, so they're international, and they might not speak English or might not speak Greek, and the people that came out to see me because I'm in Greece. I'm somewhat of a known entity, if you will. And people, I have fans, and they come out and they want to support me, and they'll find me on the side of a road, and tempt me. I remember one man pulled up alongside me, and he bought some I mean, Greece has really good pasterias, and he bought some pastries and some cookies, and he said, "Hey, I know you're following this ancient diet, but wouldn't a cookie be good right now?" So I called him the devil from that point forward. I declined the cookie and somehow kept the mindset to put more figs in my mouth.
Good for you. That's amazing. Tell us where the lowest point was. There surely must have been points in the race where you felt like you couldn't have gone on or didn't want to proceed because it was so challenging and such a tight time schedule. What was your low point during that event?
Well, you actually climb a mountain in the middle of the night. So I remember climbing the top of it's Parnatha. I remember climbing the top of this mountain, and it was so windy up there. To the point, I had a jacket on, a shell. It was still pretty warm, but it was the wind was howling. And I remember looking at these two guys that were kind of huddled around a fire, and the fire was just going. It was just coals at that point because there was no way to keep it lit in the flames. And I thought, this race is, this situation is desperate for these guys being up on this, this mountainous peak with this wind that's going to go on all night, and my situation not so much better. I just remember being really low at that point, like kind of life is is a struggle and you lose.
Wow. And then the finish is also quite interesting because you push through that low point, you were able to finish, but there's not necessarily a finish line that you get to. Can you tell us about the finish and what that felt like?
Yeah, I mean, again, if you've seen the movie 300, you know who the king of Sparta was at the time, Leonidas or Leonidas. And when you finish the race, you basically reach up and you touch his bronze feet. It's a huge statue in the main square of Sparta, which Sparta is actually a place in Greece as well. So that's how the race ends when you touch his feet, and it's spine chilling. I mean, I touched his feet and started to weep. My knees buckled, and you watch anyone coming up and touching his feet. Some people collapse, some people cry, some people laugh, but it's just a glorious moment if you can make it there within 36 hours and finish the race.
Well, you mentioned finishing the race, and yeah, the battle of attrition that we mentioned earlier. How many people did finish the event the year that you did it? I want to say it was nearly 50-50 from what I recall.
Yeah, I think it was about half that year. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's a high dropout rate
And
for
and, and no, and these are the best athletes in the world too. It's not like there's 50 slackers that kind of just gave up. I mean, these
right.
are people that know how to fight and have been there before. Because, again, as I said, that just to get into this race, the qualifying standards, what you have to do at a 100-mile race, you know, at other distances to even get in is really high.
Yeah, the qualification standards. I mean, you described, I believe it was like an American champion in one of the events that passed you early, but then he was not able to continue on at some point. So that tells you how difficult that race was.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely no certainty with this race. I don't care. It humbles you. I don't care if you're a champion, you know, or someone who's just new to the sport. You know, there's no mercy. This race, you know, eats its young, if you will.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, okay, this is in your book. You say this is the part where this story should end. You did all of this amazing research. You learned about, you know, the history of Pheidippides and this amazing run that he was able to do. You were able to replicate it. You accomplished your mission. You did it as authentically as you possibly could. And this is where the story should end. But you have a bit of the story to go when we go back to what happened with Pheidippides arriving at Sparta. Can you tell us a little bit about what next unfolded with that story?
Yes, I will. I mean, he got to Sparta. He made it, and he pronounced to the men of Sparta that, you know, the Athenians were uh, requesting them to come to their assistance as quickly as they could because of the Persian invasion. The Spartans said, "Okay, that's, you know, you're our brethren, you're our fellow countrymen. We'll come to your aid." And Pheidippides said, "That's great. Let's go." And they said, "There's one slight caveat. We can't leave. Our religion forbids us for leaving for battle until there's a full moon, and that's not for another 6 days." So, being the trained hemodromi that he was, Philip decided to get up the next morning and run back to Athens to tell his countrymen the Spartans are coming. They're just delayed for 6 days, and that's exactly what he did. So he had a hallucination with the god Pan, and if you know anything about mythology, Pan is his upper torso is a man, his lower torso is a goat. You've probably seen the cartoons or something for Pan. He had a hallucination in the middle of the night that Pan told him, you know, the Athenians are not honoring me the way they should. You know, you're becoming slackers, if you will. You know, pick it up, have that discipline that I have, and I'll support you. So you know, it could be the first ever recorded running related hallucination. This is Herodotus, so he's writing in, you know, 400 BC. But Phidippides went to the battlefield and told the other Athenians, you know, the Spartans are coming in 6 days. But he also said, you know, let's be true to Pan, because if we get into a fight, Pan will instill panic and pandemonium in the enemy. So that's how the story was told.
Wow, that's amazing. As somebody who probably in modern time took yourself as close to feeling the way that he did, doing the event as authentically as you possibly could. Again, lots of things are different now. Everything's modernized. You're running on roads. You had decent shoes. You know, aid stations were there, navigation aids. But again, in my opinion, pure Greek blood running through your veins and doing this event, having gone through that event, you must have put yourself in his shoes, knowing that you just accomplished that amazing feat. You delivered the message that you need to deliver, but now it's just as important for you to get back as quickly as you got there and to take a quick night's sleep and turn right back around and run back. How would you have felt being in his shoes?
It's hard to project because, you know, the only thing I kept thinking about is if my family was at stake. You know, he was a bit of an older hemodromi. He was in like an elder statesman, kind of at the end of his career. So he probably had family, and you're thinking that he's running, you know, to save not only his family, all of his Athens, his city, his home, everything. He's not just running, you know, to try to set a record or try to, you know, get in before the cutoff. I mean, this guy is running to save everything he holds most dear. And you know, the stakes get really high when you start trying to think about that. And you can only think about it. You can't really project what it must feel like for him to know he had to succeed. Like failure meant probably the death, you know, not only the death of him, but the death of everything he cherished.
Yeah, wow. And you do such a good job at this in your book. I love your line, like historians don't like to speculate about, what would have happened if the Athenians would have lost, but I'm not a historian, so I get to do whatever I want. Can you tell us about some of the implications in modern times? Like we think about this as happening, 2,500 years ago. It doesn't really matter today, but if they would have lost that battle, if Phidippides hadn't done what he done and delivered the message, can you tell us what some of the possible implications could have been?
Yeah, I mean, Athens was just developing this idea of democracy. So, rule by the people. And if, one of the things that the Persians wanted to do is put an end to this idea because they didn't want it spreading. And the Persian Empire was vast. I mean, there was about 2 million people projected at that time in the Persian Empire, and there was 10,000 Athenians. So, they just said, let's nip this idea of democracy in the bud before it even, can take root or anything. So that would have changed the course of history in so many different ways. It's hard to project how history, if we would have eventually come to democracy, but we know that, Plato, who was a big proponent of democracy and wrote, the Republic, he came about 80 years later. So if the Persians had been in control of Athens at the time, we would have no Plato. Socrates was his mentor. We would have no Socrates. We would have no Aristotle. And these are all the tenets of Western civilization. The way we think is so profoundly influenced by those three men. We don't even know. Most people, I mean, I know because I studied classics. Most people don't even know that kind of like the way we conduct our life is because of what these three guys thought about. So, had that not occurred, who knows what the world would be like today? But it would be different, that's for sure.
That's incredible. And then going back to Phidippides, if we look at all the running that he did, so if I understand it right, it was about 153 miles to Sparta, 153 miles back, and then an additional 25 miles to Marathon. And then where he fought, we believe that he fought with all the other, warriors, and then returned home and then passed away. Do we have most of that story correct?
Yeah, you do. I mean, you gloss over a lot of interesting facts, I think. One, the Battle of Marathon, like we're running geeks and we're, endurance sports geeks. But if you're like a historian of battles, like Marathon is one of the greatest battles that ever existed because of the techniques the Athenians used to defeat the Persians. Yeah, as I said, they were badly outnumbered. And, to move the book forward quickly, the Spartans did not deploy they deployed 6 days, but the battle had already taken place. The Athenians decided that they couldn't wait for 6 days, that every day the Persians were reinforcing their position, so they had to attack. So they attacked basically by charging the Persians, who were used to using what they call the longbow. The Persians were the first people to invent a bow and arrow. And the Athenians realized these bow and arrows would devastate them if they just stood back and tried to withstand this barrage of of arrows. So they charged at the Persians. The Persians had never been charged uh, like that before, and they somehow defeated the Persians. So the battle itself and the tactics the Greeks used were really quite clever.
Wow, that's amazing. And then you also tell the story about how the distance of the marathon kind of changed. Everybody knows the distance from Athens to Marathon is 26.2, but that's not actually the case. That got changed later in the modern day Olympics, correct?
Yes, I mean, a lot of people don't. I don't think they realize that the marathon was never part of the ancient Olympics. I mean, the longest distance, it wasn't even a mile. It was less than half a mile in the ancient Olympics. But in the modern Olympics in 1896, they had this idea of starting this thing called the marathon race, based on the everything we've been talking about. So that was the first time there was a marathon distance race. And the distance from Marathon, the town of Marathon in Greece, to Athens is more like 24.8 miles. So the first modern marathon, or the first marathon actually, race was 24.8 miles. And it was that way for the next Olympics, and then 1908, the Olympics were held in the UK. And because of circumstances with the Royal Viewing Box being right at the finish line of this new track that was built. it was 26.2 miles. So the king of Britain at the time issued a decree changing the distance of the marathon to 26.2 miles, and it just stuck from there on.
That's such a great story. I absolutely love that. Oh man. Well, we'll leave the rest for the listener to go out and grab your book. Like I said, you did such a wonderful job tying your own personal story into a historical story that not many people know about and find quite interesting. And I just it was totally it just completely sucked me in. So I really appreciate that. As you are reflecting back on the things that you've accomplished in your career, when you are talking to people about the importance of enduring, how do you explain how ultra marathon sports and endurance sports in general can help be a metaphor for life for all of us for enduring difficult things?
Yeah, I mean, I think most importantly is, the idea of this too shall pass. I don't know how I've gotten to the finish of so many ultra marathons where I thought I'll never get to the finish, but I just be in the present moment, like the here and now, when things get tough. I don't think about what's, coming up. I don't reflect on the past. I just put myself in the here and now, and I remind myself, like, yeah, it sucks right now, but this will pass. And every moment passes and every moment passes, and eventually it gets a little bit better. So I think that we all experience such struggles in our life, especially nowadays. But just reminding yourself that as bad as this thing is right now, it'll pass. Like there will be a tomorrow, and it'll be a different scenario altogether.
That's such an important lesson. I absolutely love that. I've been very curious to ask you this question. Recently, we interviewed Brad Kearns, who just wrote the book with Mark Sisson called Born to Walk. And obviously, that's kind of a tongue in cheek reference to Christopher McDougall's book, Born to Run. And part of their argument in the book is that the running boom, as it came about and really exploded in the 70s with we mentioned Nike shoes, with elevated heels and really cushioned shoes, was actually a bit of a mistake where it allowed a greater number of people to access the sport, but then pitched them forward in an unnatural position, allowed them to overstride, which caused a bunch of injuries. And their argument is along the lines of like it allowed people who are not metabolically healthy, maybe don't have the structure, maybe are a bit overweight, to be able to compete in running events. And they do say, like, we encourage you to do a marathon, we encourage you to train for something, but it's the chronic overuse day to day for people that maybe shouldn't be doing that in footwear that's inappropriate for what they're doing. That's where it gets a little bit tricky, and they encourage more people to walk. I see that side of things. And then I also see these marathons where, yeah, participation is way up and the finishing times obviously are way down, but these people are accomplishing something wonderful, and yet they might be getting hurt. And anyway, I just see these things as kind of a dichotomy or two sides of the same coin. And I've just been really curious, like, how do you think about those two realities?
I mean, I think they're not dichotomous, just as you said. I think both of the statements and the premises you put forth are valid. I see both sides of the story. Uh, you know, footwear, modern footwear is what it is, and I'm not sure running ultra marathons, back to back is such a healthy pursuit. I am a kind of an experiment of one or other ultra marathoners. I mean, I know personally I'm in pretty good shape for my age. I mean, by all metrics that we use, resting heart rate, VO2 max, all those sort of things, lean body mass. Whether I'm gonna, die tomorrow, who knows? But it seems like what I'm doing and the way I'm pushing my body is a fairly healthy pursuit. I think that for me, I encourage people to look at their life through the lens of being the best animal they can be, especially if you're an athlete. So I think that an athlete that's going to run a marathon should be prepared to run a marathon. I mean, yeah, you can kind of fake your way through it, if you will, by not training so much and still eating the wrong foods and running in these super shoes as you described. But are you cheating yourself? And I know a lot of people that have done just as I described, and they've changed their whole their whole persona. Everything has changed because they said, no, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to be a legitimate marathoner, and I like, this is something I love to do, and I'm going to get better at it. I'm going to drop some weight. I'm gonna scale back my mileage. I'm going to train smarter. So I see both sides of the argument.
I really appreciate that insight. And they do write about you, and they do write about the Road to Sparta and kind of tell the story of the marathon. And they talk about you and Chris McDougall and a bunch of the other authors very favorably, and just say that, look, these people have the body type that's perfectly suited for this, and they can go chronically long distances. And yeah, it gives us pause to just try to remember, like, what is a healthy amount that we can be pushing ourselves, but also remembering the importance of competing in endurance sport and what life lessons that carries with us, I think is really important. So I really appreciate your perspective. I do have to ask you a bit about your diet. It's something that you write about a lot, and talk a lot about the importance of like a really whole foods type of diet and getting a lot of the ultra processed crap out of the diet. What has been your journey as far as your diet goes?
Yeah, I mean, it's been to arrive kind of just what you said, and that was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, before it's kind of fashionable to be, doing the diet I'm doing. But I like to say, if I can't pick it from a tree or dig it from the earth, or catch it with my hands, I try not to eat it. So, nothing processed or refined, nothing in a bag. If it comes from a plant, eat it. If it's made in a plant, don't. um, you can't. People, I think a lot of people don't realize you can't pick a piece of wheat from the field and put it in your mouth. You can't pick an oat and put it in your mouth. I mean, a lot of grains have to be refined or processed to be edible. So I try to avoid those.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, it's definitely showing because you look amazing. I believe you're 62 years old. Is that correct?
No, when I hit 60, I'm going backwards. So now I'm
Oh,
58. So my
okay.
my life is out and back to 60. So now I'm on the way back. But yeah, no, I'm 62.
Gotcha. Oh man. Before we let you go, what's next on the horizon for you? You don't seem like you're going to be slowing down anytime soon. You must have other goals that you're going to try to accomplish, or ones you might revisit. What's next for you?
Well, I mean, there's this great race in California called the Badwater Ultramarathon. We never really discussed it, but it's a 135-mile foot race across Death Valley from the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, which is Badwater, which is 282 feet below sea level, to the highest point on the contiguous U.S., which is Mount Whitney, which is about 14,500 feet at the summit. So the idea is to go from the lowest point to the highest point. I've done this race a number of times, and I just love that format. So I'm planning on trying to run from the lowest point on Earth to the highest point on Earth. I'm going to test you now. What's the
To
highest point on Earth? What's the highest point on Earth? It's not a trick question, because I have people
of
that are
course,
like,
it's Everest.
Everest, yeah. But do you know the lowest point on Earth?
Well, it would be it's Dead Sea,
Yeah, you're
correct?
right. Yeah, you nailed it. Absolutely. Yeah.
All
In
right.
Jordan. So the idea is to run from the lowest. That's what I'm working on. My next project is run from the lowest point to the highest point.
That is absolutely amazing. That would be quite the story if you can pull that off. I can't imagine that would be a very easy feat logistically. Physically, of course, that would be quite a challenge, but logistically, that must be very challenging.
Especially so because there's a couple different routes you can take. The most direct route goes through Iraq and Iran, and I'm having a hard time, getting permission to go into those countries. The less direct route goes through the stand, so up to the north, to Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. But that adds it almost doubles the distance, and it makes it a
Oh my
lot
goodness.
tougher for other reasons as well. But we'll see. Hopefully, the political climate globally will mellow out in a bit in the next year or two, and I can get this done.
Wow. Well, for your sake, I'm hoping for that as well. But yeah, Dean, I'm just so appreciative of your work. Your other books are amazing as well. I really loved Ultramarathon Man, and again, you do such a great job of writing and getting people very engaged and getting me interested in something I was not previously interested in. And I'm very surprised I was able to catch up with you today. But we're so gracious for you and your amazing work, not only on the trail but coming back to share your stories and make it interesting and entertaining for people. You just do such a wonderful job of that, and so grateful for you and your time today. It's been a long time coming, and like I said, very grateful for you. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Ah, I just Google my name. Someone told me if you type in Dean, I'm one of like the first people that pop up. So, I mean, if you want to follow me I've got a website, or I'm on social media, however you prefer. But you can just type in my name into any search engine and you can find me.
Yeah, perfect. I don't think I needed to get past Dean Space K before your name started popping up everywhere. So that's certainly the case. Like I said, so grateful for all of your work and for taking time to be on our show today. Best of luck with your future endeavors. If there is a way for the political climate to change. I know that accomplishment will be something that you will achieve, and I can't wait to hear you come back and tell the tale. So thank you so very much for your work.
I enjoyed our conversation. No,
Really
I enjoyed
appreciate
it. Yeah, thank you for your passion. You're a great
we really
host. You're a
appreciate it.
passionate host. Yeah.
Of course. Well, thank you very much. We really, really appreciate you, my friend. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.